Okay, good afternoon. I think everybody's probably had an opportunity to log on. So I would like to welcome you to the Water Quality Certification Fee Stakeholder Meeting. The Fee Stakeholder Meeting is a space for the Water Board's fee staff and respective program staff to engage with you and the stakeholders by sharing new fee proposals and hearing your ideas, comments, and concerns. The ultimate goal is to have a fee structure that meets the mandate of the program regulations and the needs of the stakeholders. So I'm going to start with a few introductions. I'm Cassandra White. I am the branch manager from the Fee and Revenue branch. I'll be conducting the fee meeting today. And we also have other Fee and Revenue branch staff here who will be assisting with the logistics of the meetings. And assisting us today from the Water Quality Certification Program, we have Samantha Parker. She'll be presenting the Water Quality Certification presentation. And we have program managers Paul Hahn and Jean Bandura. And also from the Division of Water Quality, we have Deputy Director Phil Crater and Assistant Deputy Director Nick Martirano. There may be some first-time participants to the fee stakeholder process, so I wanted to give you a few housekeeping rules. If you experience any technical difficulties, please email the fee branch email, and that email is feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov, and the staff will be able to assist you as soon as possible. And there are two ways that you can engage in this meeting. The first one is using the raise your hand feature. Staff will enable your microphone to allow you to speak in the order that the hand appears. If you're unable to raise your hand function, please email the fee branch email and we will put you in the queue to speak. And the second way is you can just email the fee branch email and staff will read it and the question will be addressed accordingly. To ensure that the meeting runs smoothly and all stakeholders have the opportunity to participate in this meeting, we ask that you limit your questions to one question at a time. However, if you have clarifying questions, those are acceptable. But once your question is completely answered, you'll be required to re-enter the queue for any additional questions and by using the raise your hand function again or sending another email. And periodically, we will, throughout the meeting, we'll pause to make sure we check to see if there are any emails, as sometimes there is a delay in when the email is sent and when we receive it. And I think with that, we can get started with the meeting. And so the next slide. Okay, so today, the purpose of today's meeting is a fee development timeline. And I'm just going to give you a little information here on the timeline that we're looking at. So the intent is to implement the approved proposal in fiscal year 26-27 at the second September board meeting in 26-27. We will be holding additional water quality certification stakeholder meetings later this year and into next year. And the scheduling will be contingent upon feedback received from this meeting. And then beginning calendar year 2026, we will incorporate this proposal into the general stakeholder meetings held March, June, and August, unless we determine that separate program meetings are still needed. And the second item purpose, we will be reviewing the guiding principles on how fees are set for this program. We'll discuss the background information on the water quality certification program fees. We'll be presenting conceptual changes to the existing fee methodology. We'll provide an opportunity for discussion and input from the water quality certification fee payers. And then we'll use the feedback to further develop the fee methodology proposal. And we wanted to note that any numbers discussed at this point today in this proposal and process are just conceptual placeholders and will be determined, the actual will be determined based on the fee setting budget after the methodology is defined. So today is just a point of departure for what we will be discussing. Next slide, please. And also I wanted to say back on the timeline that we just wanted to start the process early so we can have a robust engagement with the stakeholders and making sure that we are allowing ample time to fully flesh out the proposed fee revisions. And now I just wanted to go over the guiding principles for the WDPF, or the Waste Discharge Permit Fund program fees. And these are kind of the guidelines that we go by and what we look at when we are developing fees. So the first one is revenue neutral, meaning if we increase one fee category, we will have to decrease another fee category. And so it ends up being a zero sum, which is revenue neutral. The second item is we are not a fee for service model. Although staff time is a factor considered when we are developing fees and coming up with fee structures, but is not the only factor in developing that, which would make it a fee for service. And the third one is it must be implementable statewide. So if there is an idea specific to one region, or we would not be able to do it. It has to be, it makes sense and be able to be applied throughout the state for the program. And also indirect and redirected costs are added to the direct program expenditures. And that's for things like rent, pro rata, and foundational costs that are all added toward each program's costs. And the last item we look at, we try to minimize yearly swings. And in particular for the water quality certification, this, because the majority of the revenue comes from applications, it makes it a little harder to predict the anticipated revenue each year, which could contribute to a yearly swing for this particular program. And then we'll go to the next slide. And I will hand it over to Samantha.
You're on mute, Samantha.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Samantha, and I am with the Wetland Permitting Program at the State Water Resources Control Board. I'm really excited to get the opportunity to present this conceptual methodology that we have worked on and receive the input from you all. So program staff have identified an opportunity to assess our fee program. And the goal of the stakeholder meeting is to introduce the conceptual methodology that we are proposing. Keeping in mind, this is still at the concept phase, and we are hoping for constructive input at this time. We aim to determine if an alternative approach may be beneficial for improving the health and longevity of the water quality certification program. We reviewed and analyzed program data and application data to inform the development of this alternate fee methodology proposal. We're hoping that this concept will improve the consistency and predictability of the revenue stream to better match the revenue required for staff resources. As Cassandra mentioned in the slide before, we're not a fee service model. However, we do still need to collect enough fee revenue to cover overall staff expenses. Additionally, we want to lower the fee barrier to permitting. The current fee regulations is linked in the handout if you need to view what the current fee schedule is. Next slide, please. Thank you. So as an overview for this concept, we're proposing a new fee methodology in which the applications are assigned a point value based on the complexity of the different factors involved for the proposed project. The factors we identified correlate with an increased risk of water pollution and more closely tie fees to the required staff resources for the water quality certification program fees. Points from each factor category will be totaled and categorized into 5 fee tiers, where fee tier 1 will have a reduced fee calculation compared to fee tier 5, which will have the highest fee calculation. Next slide. Here's a list of the factors that we are considering for developing our new fee methodology. The first factor we are considering in this methodology is the permit type. Individual 401 certifications, the state standard certification of water quality for dredge or fill permits, waste discharge requirement orders, which are permits issued under the Porter Cologne Water Quality Control Act. The water boards regulates waste discharges that could affect water quality, including the discharge of dredge or fill material, and general order enrollees, projects that qualify for enrollment under a general order, such as a nationwide permit, a regional board general permit, or a waiver. Each of these categories have different risks of pollution, staff workloads, and impacts, with waste discharge requirement orders having the highest risk and requiring regional board adoption process, as well as additional verification of aquatic resources delineation reports for waters of the state via desktop review or in-field verification. We encourage enrollment under our various general orders. Oh, can you go back, please? We encourage enrollment under our general orders, but it is important to note that while the application process for these general orders are streamlined, the threat of water pollution still exists for these projects. For impacts, we are suggesting a change from where we currently are looking at total impacts. We want to separate permanent impacts and temporary impacts, where the permanent impacts are assigned a higher point value compared to temporary impacts, as projects with permanent impacts often have a higher risk of water pollution. And finally, we're introducing the factor for the alternatives analysis as identified in the state wetland definition and procedures for discharges of dredge or fill materials to waters of the state. Points will be assigned based on the respective alternative analysis tier 1 through tier 3. Next slide, please. Each of the factors mentioned in the previous slide will be assigned a point value based on the risk of pollution to waters. The projects will be placed into one of 5 fee tiers based on the sum of those points assigned, where fee tier 1 is the lowest risk and lowest fee, and fee tier 5 is the highest risk and highest fee. We will be working with the fee unit in the Department of Administrative Services to determine the actual dollar amounts and fee calculation based on the fee setting budget for the fiscal year in which this new methodology is introduced, which will hopefully be fiscal year 26-27. While we haven't fully defined the fee calculation, an example would be described on this slide. Fee tier 1 would replace the existing low impact discharge category, category E, and the fee would be a lower flat application fee. Fee tiers 2 through fee tier 5 would be calculated as an application fee, similar to how we currently calculate the fee, plus an additional per acre fee, which is similar to the existing project fee. The multiplier would be lowest for fee tier 2 and highest for fee tier 5. For example, a project in fee tier 2 could be calculated as a $2,000 application fee plus $20,000 per acre of impact. A project in fee tier 5 would be calculated as a $2,000 application fee plus a $50,000 per acre project impact fee. Again, another reminder that these numbers are just conceptual placeholders, and they will be determined as we have more information on the budget when this is more fully defined. Next slide. Here is an example of what the proposed points calculator could look like. If the threshold for each factor is met, the assigned point value will be added to the fee total. That point total will determine which fee tier the project will fall under. For example, a project with impacts to only waters of the state, including 0.25 acre permanent impacts and 0.25 acre temporary impacts, all of which are impacts to stream channels. Using this example calculator, the project would have 1 point for not qualifying under a general order, 6 points for needing a waste discharge requirement order, 2 points for the permanent impacts, 2 points for the temporary impacts, and 0 points for no alternatives analysis requirement. As a result, this project would total up to 11 points and would be placed in fee tier 5. The fee would then be calculated at the fee tier 5 rate. As another example, a project qualifying for enrollment under the nationwide permit general order has no permanent impacts, 0.01 acre of temporary impacts to lake waters. Using this calculator, the project would have 0 points for qualifying under a general order, 0 points for not needing a waste discharge requirement order, 1 point for having less than 0.01 acre of permanent impacts, 0 points for having less than 0.1 acre temporary impacts, and 0 points for no alternatives analysis required. This project would total to 1 point and would be placed in the fee tier 1. The fee would be calculated at the fee tier 1 rate. Next slide. I want to highlight that for the existing conceptual methodology, we're only looking at changing the methodology for fill and excavation discharges category A and low impact discharges category E at this time. All other fee categories, which include the dredging discharges, beach nourishment discharges, ecological restoration projects, emergency projects, and wildfire mitigation projects, are not being considered at this time. We do welcome feedback on those other categories. However, that's outside the scope of this current proposal. Also, we're only looking at the methodology for the application and project fees. While annual fees are not part of this current proposal, we are hoping to assess and make recommendations for changes at a future stakeholder meeting. And next slide. Thank you. So that is the end of my presentation for the proposal that we are putting before you. And at this time, we welcome all questions and input. Additionally, if you need time to think about it and provide feedback via email, we do welcome you to send an email to the fee branch email on the screen, feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. While it's not a hard and fast deadline, we would appreciate if you need to email additional feedback that you get it to us by May 21st so that we have time to review it and incorporate that feedback into the proposal before the next Water Quality Cert Fee stakeholder meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, I see we have a hand raised. Michelle Derry. Would you please introduce yourself and where you're from, please?
Oh, yes. Hi, my name is, I'm just trying to start my video here. Oh, there I am. Okay, hi, my name is Michelle Derry, and I'm one of the supervising planners here at the County of San Bernardino, Department of Public Works, which also includes the flood control district. And, you know, so flood control, we have big systems, right? One basin, sediment basin that protects thousands of people could be 100 acres. From what I can tell under this fee schedule, we would probably pay between $2 million and $5 million for to maintain our facilities for public safety. So I'm wondering if we could, if you would consider a tiering of category A to include a separate category for maintenance for public safety. You know, in our county alone, we've had 4 major fires. They've burned over 150,000 acres. In the last couple years, we've had 1 federal declared disaster, 4 governor declared disasters, multiple local proclamations. And so our mission is to protect the public. Our facilities are large because we have the largest mountains. We are the largest county in the contiguous United States. Our facilities are large because they are taking in all the debris from the foothills to protect the thousands of residents that live below. I don't see any provisions for public safety. It's a concern. So I'm hoping that maybe there would be that consideration. The type of work that we do, we actually, you know, you could consider it a water quality benefit because we're protecting even not only the residents, but areas downstream like the Santa Ana River from taking in all that sediment from the fire scarred areas, trash and debris that could easily go downstream, other than, you know, protecting residents from flooding, mud and debris flows. But our facilities are large and they were designed that way. They have to, you know, they're based on hydrology and hydraulic studies. And there really needs to be a consideration for this. Otherwise, it's going to be a huge hardship for counties across the state to try to protect life and property.
Thank you, Michelle. For a point of clarification, can you clarify for me, for most of these projects, are they a mix of permanent and temporary impacts, or are they primarily temporary impacts for the impacts that you guys have for the projects?
Very rarely are there permanent impacts. They're
Okay.
almost exclusively temporary impacts. So sediment comes in, like for instance, we have one of our facilities is about 100 acres. It protects thousands of residents in the city of San Bernardino. It's dirt. There's non-native grasses in there. And so we have, you know, the mud and debris that comes from the foothills and
Yeah.
the mountain areas, and it lies in there, fills up, we take it out. In fact, under our MS4 permit, we're required to maintain our systems. And so these are temporary impacts. We're really maintaining the
Okay.
baseline conditions on when they were constructed.
Okay. So with the current concept that we have, you know, this is one issue that we're hoping to try to address with the way that we've modeled this by separating the permanent and the temporary impacts. I recognize that maybe we need to do some fine tuning with the points and maybe kind of separate those out to a bit bigger margin could potentially be an option. But we are hoping that at the very least, separating out the valuation of permanent impacts to temporary impacts would kind of reduce the fee barrier for maintenance for public safety projects such as the ones in your district. Recognizing that we can't solve all of the problems and that these are large projects that do require considerable staff resources to also review the permit applications. But we are hoping to address it at least in a manner that provides addresses some of that fee barrier compared to the current proposal. And with that, I want to pass it to Paul to see if Paul has any specific input that he wants to say regarding consideration of maintenance for public safety or fees.
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Totally get where you're coming from in terms of being a large public agency that's dealing with safety issues. Wildfires, absolutely a problem here. Couple of thoughts. The first one is a question because I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you guys are seeing in this proposal the same way we intended. When you say $2 to $5 million, is that $2 to $5 million for your entire program or per project?
That would be, well, not necessarily per project because we do try to cluster different facilities for permits, but we also need authorization to continue to maintain. But my point is, one of our systems, just one basin facility that's 100 acres, according to the fee schedule, we would pay $2 million at minimum on a tier 2 just to be able to maintain for public safety. And just as an example, CDFW permit for the same facility is $6,400. So we have multiple, agencies, of course, that we work with to get authorization. The concern also is, I'll be honest with you, I think there's a little bit of an environmental justice component here because development moves from west to east. LA, these counties have already developed, and now we're trying to develop as well. But the fees have increased substantially for the water board in the last couple of years. We just had a 40% increase when we were, fighting our fires. We didn't have a lot of time to
Yeah.
even comment on that. So a lot of our systems are interim. That means that they're not meeting the 100-year FEMA standard, right? So they require more maintenance. A lot of them are earthen facilities. I mean, 20% of our roads are dirt, right? So we have hardships here in this county that other counties that have already developed don't have. And so that's what I mean by the environmental justice component. The median income per individual is 16% in San Bernardino County, less than the national average. And we're committed to providing the same level of, public safety as any other county. But these fees are going to be a hardship for us. I mean,
Yeah.
there no ifs, ands about it. It's going to be a hardship.
So one thing I want to clarify, just so we're, talking about, we're comparing apples and apples, is our current fee program has a cap on fees. And Samantha, I don't remember what the cap is off the top of my head. Do you remember?
365,000.
365,000, which I recognize is still a lot of money. I don't want to discount that, but I also note that I don't believe in our proposal we're considering removing that cap. It's early enough in the development. I hate to promise anything, but at this point, removing that cap has not been something that we've discussed. We may need to adjust the cap, but I don't see it adjusting to $2 to $5 million per project. So that's one thought there. The second thought is recognizing that, that amount of money is still a lot of money. There are some options of what we could consider doing with you in the future. They fall outside of the scope of this effort. With the utility companies, we have established a flat fee. We have the ability to do that. That might be something that we could consider in the future. That would be outside of this effort.
Okay.
The last thing
Sorry.
I'd want to be careful to mention is remember that this really is a zero-sum game. And with the changes at the federal administration, we are having to absorb a lot of workload that we didn't previously have to do because we relied on the Corps of Engineers to do it. At last count, we're running somewhere between 50 and 60 people across the state. We don't have an accurate count of how many people are at the Corps of Engineers, but we believe they're running somewhere around 200 to cover California and the neighboring states, of which the bulk of the work is California. So we think relative to the federal agencies, despite our fees being much higher, we're a pretty efficient organization. And we certainly are working to drive towards improved efficiency. We've been working hard on trying to develop general permits. We are doing this effort to try and right-size the fees. There's a lot of work that we're doing to try and minimize fee impacts. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, we do have to cover our expenses, and we are 100% fee funded in this program. So we don't receive any fees from the general fund. And so it does, as a result, make this program fairly expensive. So those are the things that I'd like you to keep in mind. I recognize that this is a hardship for you. I will certainly try and work with you to the extent that we can. Please recognize the limitations that we have in front of us.
I do. I appreciate that. Thank you. I actually came to talk because I thought the 365,000 was a little high.
And you're not alone in
Yeah.
that. I will tell you that we did an analysis and Samantha has the details of it, but we looked at how many people hit that, how many projects hit that cap. And it's actually a fairly small number of projects. But of course, the flood control agencies are one of the more common programs to hit it.
Right, and we have a lot of 5-year permits, maintenance permits, and we're in the process of like renewing or getting new permits.
Yeah.
So these fee increases are hitting us particularly hard. Um, I do want to also, and I do recognize the challenges at the state level, and I appreciate that. I do want to mention, just because I do work on maintenance permits myself as well as staff, that it really isn't that much effort to permit a facility that's 2 acres versus 100. Most of our facilities are heavily disturbed facilities, right? Because they're taking in a lot of mud and debris. So they just happen to be large because they're built in order to protect people, to protect the residents. So it depends on what's coming from the watershed, right? So that's where the hydrology analysis and everything comes into place. But you know, you're still submitting the same permit application, you're submitting the map, you're doing your beneficial use analysis, you're doing alternative analysis, you know, you do your bio report, your cultural review. The effort to review, I really isn't that much more substantial. What it comes down to is the acres. Um, so I understand if it was like a more complex, like a very complex project, you know, we have new construction projects that are complicated and they require a lot more review. But on
Yeah.
these routine maintenance, they are routinely maintained systems, right? So there really isn't a huge level of review. I don't think, I do feel that the fees don't reflect the review that actually occurs in routine maintenance because they're maintenance, you know, they're not,
Yeah.
it's not new, that's not a change in hydrology. It's, you know, you're not taking an area of like sensitive habitat and then just building this huge project. It's not like that. So I do think that you know, if you could, you know, respectfully asking if you could take a look at what is routine maintenance, what really are the true impacts? They really aren't impacted. We follow our MS permit. We do implement all our construction BMPs. These systems were designed to carry sediment. So because they do carry sediment and sediment settles in there, you know, we have to take it out. So because they're long linear or big facilities, the acreage is, they're large. And if it's a fee based on acreage, that's where the issue lies. Rather than, you know, maybe a little bit of look on, is this acreage reflecting the level of effort required to review the permit applications for flood control? They are not for maintenance. I just
Yeah.
ask that you take a look at that.
I think what I'm hearing you suggest is that, and let me back up here a little bit. What Samantha is showing is a framework that provides us a number of knobs that we can turn. And so hopefully we're getting, and I'd like to hopefully steer the direction of this conversation towards, do we have the right set of knobs? And I think what you're saying there is that one of the knobs we ought to be thinking about is this routine maintenance that's done every year and is already well understood.
Right.
So that's something that we absolutely can consider. Again, we're too early in the process for me to make any promises about that, but I think it's a reasonable thing for us to think about. One thing I'd like to ask Samantha, because she's more familiar with the details, is our current fee structure is pretty limited to just considering acres. How would the new process work with acres? Is it still acre driven, or is it, or are there other things that might mitigate that reliance on acreage?
Yeah, so we are hoping to provide, like you said, Paul, some additional knobs to turn besides just the acreage. So while it is still heavily reliant on the acreage, and a lot of our framework here was dependent upon data that we have available to analyze and assess if the methodology would work within those factors. But we are looking at the additional factors. Let's see, can we go to slide 8 to pull that list up? So we are looking at, you know, if it qualifies under a general order, if a waste discharge requirement is necessary, if there's any alternatives analysis required for this project. We looked at several other factors and topics, but I do welcome input at this time for additional factors for us to consider. So if you have specific topics that you'd like us to analyze and assess if they're appropriate to be implemented statewide in this fee proposal. I definitely welcome that feedback. I think that if we have more knobs to turn, if we have more factors to consider, I think that that will help fine tune some of the spread of the fee burden.
I think one knob just right off the bat, honestly, is it I think this is a good set of knobs. I like the word knobs. It's a good set. But I do think there's a huge difference between public safety and the type of work that the flood control districts and public works folks do than new construction. To me, this is a new construction type of, kind of, I don't know, matrix or, checklist. So this seems to be a good application for new construction, but I do think that there maybe should be a different set for routine maintenance for public safety. Because we're talking public safety, we've had loss of life. In 2022, we had loss of life. We and it's tragic. And this was a result of fires, mud and debris flows. So we do think that because we're trying to protect the public, there really needs to be a consideration for that. Because the acreage we're dealing with is large, because the areas that are damaged are large. We're talking 150,000 acres right now. And we've had more damage from monsoons than I can, in 20 years, I've never seen that kind of damage that we've had in the last 3. So normally the monsoons are in the desert, right? Our biggest storms in the valley have been in August and September. That's unusual. And I don't know if that is a pattern that's going to occur in the future, but we have our storm season and now we have our monsoon season in the summer. It's like raining all year, storms all year. So if we're going to protect the public, protect life and property, maybe just to consider a separate schedule like this calculation for routine maintenance for public safety.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We have an email question. So you want to go ahead and read the question?
Yeah, this is from Margaret Borniaz. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce your last name. From the Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. For the tiered fee structure, would the proportionality be maintained with actual per acre fee amount? For example, tier 1 per acre fees will consistently be 40% lower than tier 5 per acre fee.
Can you read that one more time?
Yes, and for staff, I just put it in the chat as well. For the tiered fee structure, would the proportionality be maintained with actual per acre fee amounts? For example, tier 1 per acre fees. Sorry, let me read that again. Tier 1 per acre fees will consistently be 40% lower than tier 5 per acre fees.
Thank you,
Samantha,
Margaret, for that question. Yeah, can we go to slide 7? So this is still at a concept phase. We're still developing the actual fee calculation and how the points will be evaluated. So at this phase in the development of our proposal, we're still looking at, how many points will we assign to permanent impacts versus temporary impacts. And we're analyzing the data that we're collecting specific to this project over the course of this current calendar year to better inform the spread of how our applications, the spread of applications that we receive and where they would fall within this existing points calculator. And with that information, the fee unit will kind of help be able to determine an actual calculation and how how the tiers will be calculated based on what the fee setting budget's going to be. and I'll let them kind of address that a little bit, but let me just kind of clarify that what we do propose currently is that Tier 1 is essentially going to replace the existing low impact category E, which is going to be a low impact project, and it will be just a simple flat low project, a low application fee, for example, $800 for fee tier 1. And then fee tier 2 through 5 will scale proportionally. How much that change is going to be will depend on a lot of factor based on the actual numbers that we're looking at the time of implementation. And Cassandra, did you have anything to add regarding just the implementation of the actual numbers?
Yes, like you said, it's really contingent upon the actual budget at the time. The actual numbers that we have at the time will dictate what those numbers will be. And it could fluctuate just depending on what the budget is at that time. So it's really kind of difficult to say.
Yeah, thank you. But so conceptually, while I can't say consistently 40% lower between tier 2 and tier 5, there will be an incremental increase between tier 2 and tier 5.
Correct.
The numbers that I put on this slide of the 20,000 per acre, those are just kind of numbers that I pulled out based off of the existing fee schedule. And they aren't the numbers that we're necessarily going to use, but this was just for a reference point so you could kind of get a visual of what that calculation might look like. But ultimately, fee tier 2 will have a flat application fee and then a per acre cost, which that per acre cost will increase between tier 2 and tier 5. I hope that answers the question, Margaret.
Okay, thank you. We have hand up Angela Leno.
Hi, let me
Hello.
get my video on here. Let's see there. Hello, my name is Angela Leno and I'm with Westerville Ecological Services. We do habitat restoration and preservation to create mitigation projects. And I appreciate that opportunity to provide input into for consideration in the new fee proposal. I did want to speak on, I understand that there is a fee category for ecological restoration, but that our projects, because we are a mitigation banking company, are not considered voluntary restoration. So we've been told we don't fall within that fee category, and that we are considered under the category A. And so my question is I'm wondering how we can qualify for the restoration general order if we have an increase in aquatic resource acres on the project site, but that we still don't qualify under that category D, I believe it is, for ecological restoration. And I'm just wondering if there's some opportunity to either address that kind of inconsistency within the fee structure for category A, or if there's an opportunity to get coverage for these types of projects under category D.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela.
I
Can I
just wanna-
answer first? I'm going to just
Sure.
one quick thing before I pass it to Paul, who's going to
Yeah.
have some comments on that. Angela, so what I would like to ask you is, are there specific factors for your projects that you think we could add to our list of factors that might provide some reduction of fee barrier for the type of restoration work that you guys do that maybe we could consider adding to this proposal?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that is really triggering the fee increases on our end is that wetland conversion. So increasing the functions and values of existing wetlands, like managed wetlands to tidal wetlands. This is considered a permanent impact because it's a conversion, but it's actually a beneficial impact. It's going to have benefits on water quality, long-term water quality, and habitat values for the site. And so if there was, some way that that could be analyzed under a different category of permanent impact, that would certainly be beneficial.
Okay, thank you. I think that that's an interesting suggestion of adding potentially additional category of type of impact that we could potentially take a look at. And then if you think of any other topics that we might be able to assess for this, I welcome you to submit those to me. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul to respond to the rest of your question.
Samantha, I think you did an excellent job responding to that question. I don't really have anything to add at this point.
Yeah, and one thing I would just point out is that, and I know Westervelt has had some conversations with other staff. I think I saw Jean was on was an attendee at this meeting as well. But one of the things that we're looking at is that the scope of the work that we're doing is no different from projects that qualify for the Category D. We're considered not voluntary because our projects would provide offsets. However, we are voluntarily restoring habitat on the landscape ahead of any project impacts, and there's no guarantee that all of those credits will be sold and used for project impacts. So it is essentially, when we're putting the stuff in the ground, it is a voluntary decision. We're putting up all of the capital up front to do these beneficial projects. So just wanted a little plug there. And I'm certainly will be happy to kind of think of other ideas where maybe there could be some things considered within the current fee schedule that could maybe address some of those issues. And the reason why this comes up for us right now too is that we do have a pretty large restoration project that we're working on that has some habitat conversions for a pretty considerable amount of area that would max us out, and we would hit that fee ceiling. So just want to see if there's some other ideas, especially for our projects as we move forward and we have new projects. Because a lot of the easy restoration projects have been done, and so that leaves us with more challenging projects that involve, these similar types of conversions or improvements of the existing wetlands. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. We'll stop and check. Are there any email questions? There are no email questions at this time. Are there any more questions? Okay, Michelle Derry.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Cassandra. I was just wondering if I could get a copy of this presentation.
Yeah, we'll post it. I would say within a week of the meeting, as well as the recording will be posted on the board videos page as well. And you can
Okay.
always email us if you need that link.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, There are no more. Oh, we have a question. Elise?
Hi there. My name's Elise Ozialor. I'm with eCorp Consulting. I have a question regarding the draft fee schedule that you had in there, or rather the calculator of the fees. Whether those acreage limits are kind of in the ballpark of what you're actually thinking of using for these cutoffs for the different points values, or if those were kind of just placeholders for now. Because as everyone's sitting here talking about like acreage of impacts and what tiers they might end up falling under, it seems like the analysis is very acreage heavy, because not only does it give you extra points, but then once those points get you into a tier, you're additionally assessing a per acre fee on top of that. And these, just looking at these, the acreage limits seem pretty small for jumping from 1 point to 2 point, like a 0.01 acre is almost negligible. So I'm just curious how those numbers came about and how heavily focused the calculator will then be on acreage versus the actual intensity of the project in terms of like needing the alternatives analysis and more significant review based on the actual water quality concerns for the projects.
Absolutely. Thank you, Elise. So the impacts that we have listed in the calculator, those are they're a placeholder. They are still open for changes throughout the development of this proposal. The numbers that we have up here are loosely based off of a combination of the spread of impacts for most of the projects for most of the permits that we have, as well as numbers that are used in the existing orders, as well as the alternatives analysis amounts. So we kind of hodgepodge those together to come up with the numbers that we have here. At the end of the day, we would primarily be looking at, the data that we're looking at over this current calendar year and comparing it to prior year's data is going to determine like the spread of impacts. So we would kind of want to sort of see a more normalized spread for those point values, but they are open to changes. So if you have specific recommendations on where you would like to see those numbers, I do welcome that input. The current plan is that those numbers would ultimately just be decided based off of the history of the permit received data and the impacts for those.
And I'll throw in there again a reminder that at the end of the day, this is a fee-supported program, and whatever financial model we come up with, it has to result in us being able to support our staff.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Or any email questions? Not seeing any. We can go to the next slide. No email questions, confirmed. Okay, so this takes us to our open discussion. If there are any,
I just have
Oh.
one more,
Okay.
Cassandra. So this is going to be, you're looking at trying to implement a new fee system in 2026. And
Correct.
okay, and then are there any more workshops, stakeholder meetings that are planned in the next 2 months?
Not necessarily in the next 2 months, but we will be having more of these
Okay,
water quality cert specific stakeholder meetings.
okay.
Okay. So are there any fee-related questions or any other water quality cert questions that were not related to the proposal that anyone had at this time during the open discussion period? Angela?
Hi. Sorry, I just had one thought that I wanted to ask. I had noticed on the or the point calculator is that it seems like on projects where there's permanent impacts, but maybe where the applicant is looking to reduce some of those impacts, and make them temporary impacts versus permanent, that you kind of get dinged for having both. So in a sense, you're minimizing impacts, but you're getting hit harder. So I just wanted to kind of point out that that might be something to consider.
Samantha, I want to make sure we're clear about this, because if that's, that, what Angela's suggesting is happening runs counter to what we would want to see. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding what she's saying, and that you and I have a chance to really look closely to make sure that if indeed we agree, that we can adjust our approach.
Yeah,
Are
can we
you
go to
following
slide?
it?
Yeah, can we go to slide 8, please? Thank you. Can you repeat the observation,
Yeah.
Angela?
Yeah, sorry, I will, oops. Just took my video on, so while I'm talking. So an example would be, let's say a project has impacts to 0.25 acres of wetlands, permanent impacts, and that would be assigned 2 points for that impact. But the applicant says, well, looking at trying to reduce impacts, okay, well, some of these impacts, maybe we can make them temporary and they're not permanent. So you reduce that down, so you still have maybe 0.15 acres of permanent impacts, but now you have 0.1 acres of temporary impacts. And so now you're getting dinged another point for the temporary impacts, even though really what you were trying to do was minimize your impacts.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly not our intent to discourage people from reducing their permanent impacts in favor of temporary impacts. And that's definitely something that we will take into consideration with the point valuation. I do think that it's important for us to make sure that there's like for this model, we wanted to make sure that there was a separate point valuation for permanent impacts versus temporary impacts, because some projects only have permanent impacts and some projects only have temporary impacts. But maybe there are some additional considerations that we can assess for those projects that have both permanent and temporary, and see how we can kind of make that point valuation work better in those situations.
Angela, from my end, I want to ask a clarifying question. I want to be clear. We're not at a point where I can promise anything, and I already see some potential legal concerns about what I'm about to propose, but I want to make sure that I understand what you're suggesting. And so my question is, if we took the permanent impacts and made sure that the point values were always greater than the point values for temporary impacts. So for example, temporary impacts, the size range would be 0, 1, and 2 as it sits, but permanent impacts, we might change to 3, 4, and 5 points. That would ensure that any change from permanent impacts to temporary impacts would reduce the number of point values just inherently. Would that be responsive to your concern?
I'm not sure. It's kind of like you have to almost like, put in a bunch of examples and try to see how they kind of add up. But what I was thinking here is that these are additive points. So if you only have permanent impacts, you might have less total points than if you had both permanent and temporary impacts, even though the overall acres of impacts is the same. So, you have a certain number of impacts, but if you have both permanent and temporary, your points are higher than if you only had permanent, which is which would be less favorable than having the combined, some of those being temporary.
I think I understand. Thank you. That's really helpful feedback.
Okay, thank you. So I'll do last call for any other questions or comments.
Oh, I did, Cassandra, my staff just asked me something.
Okay,
So this is on the invoice for the annual for maintenance. So we get billed annually, and we've been getting invoices even when there is no work done that year. So there's no dredge or fill. So my understanding is that if you don't do work in a facility, because of course, it's storm driven, if you don't need to do any maintenance, then we shouldn't have to pay an annual fee, right? Because we get billed annually for 5 years, right? So 5 years of maintenance, right? Under like a 401 cert. But if we don't do work in a year, I'm trying to get clarification here. We do not have to pay that annual fee. I think there's some confusion.
So with our annual fees, as long as the permit is active, an annual fee is assessed for those projects. We aren't looking at the annual fees in this specific methodology, but I am accepting input on a future proposal for an update to how we assess those annual fees.
Okay.
So I do welcome your feedback on that. However, as long as until your permit is closed out, those annual fees will be continued to be assessed.
Got it. Thanks.
thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go to just talk a little bit about next steps. As I mentioned earlier, there will be future water quality certification specific stakeholder meetings scheduled, and that's going to be scheduled based on the feedback from this meeting that we're getting today. And again, I'll just remind you that we'd like that feedback by May 21st. And then I also wanted to remind everyone that the next fees general water quality stakeholder meeting is scheduled for June 11th. I encourage you all to attend, although the proposal today will not be discussed in that meeting. We will discuss in detail the waste discharge permit fund condition, and all of the water quality program budget and revenue forecast, and that would include water quality certification. And that, if we don't have any other questions, or let me just check here, no emails, questions. That would conclude our meeting. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend the meeting and for your participation and the great feedback that you've provided. And we look forward to receiving your feedback by the 21st. Okay.